If a field is left untouched, it is only a matter of years before it starts getting thicker with briars, saplings, bushes. It becomes overgrown and almost unmaintainable. Most people want to keep this from happening. They want to preserve all their land, all the efforts that went into clearing their land years ago. They want to keep it mowed off, keep it nice and clean and orderly so they can get the most use out of their property. The big question is, how do you go about charging for something like this? Is it best to charge by the hour? Is it best to just give a flat bid, flat estimate? Or is it best to charge by the acre? There are different ways. They each have pros and cons. We're going to discuss those in this video. If you price something too high, chances are the customer is not going to be happy. They're either not going to go with you or not want you to come back. On the other hand, if you price it too low, they're going to expect it every time, and you're not going to be happy because you're not going to be making any money. The goal is to find a sweet spot where you're covering your costs and yet the customer is getting a fair rate as well. We're going to discuss that today. My name is Chad. This is Excavation Revelation, the place where excavating strategies are revealed. Strategies such as bidding, specialty mowing jobs. You can start to get a feel for how much to charge over the phone even. Ask the customer, when was it mowed last? What's the terrain like? How steep is it? Are there wet spots, springs, groundhog holes, briar patches, stumps? How big are the saplings? You can start to form a visual in your head then to get a ballpark where you're going to start to charge. It's also a good idea to go out in person then to look it over up close. So this area is steeper than it looks. It's not too thick. One bigger sapling up there. I'll just kind of pace it off here, see how big of an area it is. Let's look at charging by the hour. It's essentially the same as time and material. Somebody is paying you for the time that you spend doing work on their property. To do this accurately, you need to know a couple things, starting with the market rate in your area for specialty mowing. You might know this from the customer saying somebody else quoted the project. They might have a number they can kind of give you to get a feel. Or you might just know this from doing a couple jobs here and there, or just knowing what other guys in the area are charging. You want to keep all this in mind. The cost of living is going to vary from area to area, so the market rate is going to be a little bit different. You also need to know your target rate, what it costs you to run your machine. This is also going to vary a little bit depending on what your overhead costs are. If you have insurance, more employees, your trailer, your truck, you need to know what fuel costs, how much fuel you usually burn. If it's steeper terrain, thicker material, obviously you're going to burn more. You need to be able to calculate that in. If it's also rough terrain such as rocks or a lot of saplings, it's going to be harder on your machine, whether it's tires or tracks. You need to keep that in mind. Also, part of your target rate is your advertising, simple maintenance and upkeep on your machine, how much you want to make yourself per hour, whether it's 25 bucks, 30 bucks, all that goes into your target rate. And the more accurate you are with your target rate, the better off you're going to be. You can then know what it costs you to run your machine for an hour, and also what you can make in an hour. At that point, you can then relay that number. You obviously want to be making money. That's the goal of everything. You don't want to be making too much. You don't want to be greedy, but at the same time, you don't want to be going this for nothing. We're going backwards. So you need to be building yourself a little bit of profit as you do all this. This is your target rate. Once your target rate is established and to charge by the hour, you also need to factor in the time it takes you to travel there. Whether you're hauling your machine or you're just driving it there, your mobilization time needs to be factored in, and most of the time you can just kind of keep that same hourly rate from the time you leave your shop to get to the job, do the job, and travel back. Just keep it all the same. It usually works out pretty close. Now once you tell this rate to the customer, they're not really going to understand. They're going to think it's a little bit high. But you need to take a minute sometimes and explain to them all those things we talked about. Insurance, wear and tear, maintenance, fuel consumption. Because they're just going to think it's a matter of mowing. They're not going to understand all these hidden costs that come with owning and operating a machine, owning and operating a company. But they need to understand that's what it takes to make money, make a profit. That's why you're charging the way you are. Now, you don't always have to give out this information, but if they ask, you need to be prepared to explain this to them. So by the hour, you're then pretty safe to go and get to the property and start going about your work. One of the pros is you can essentially do this without even going to look at it. You can just tell them what it's going to cost you and just go, give it your all once you get there. One con is, once you get there, you need to keep moving. They're usually watching you. They don't want to see you wasting time, whether it's you going in the woods to go to the bathroom, you taking time to grease your machine, you getting out every 5 minutes to make a phone call. You want to be as efficient as possible because basically you're on the clock. If you do happen to make a phone call or happen to stop for a little bit, you need to be really watching your clock and be able to deduct that to charge them fairly. That is one con with charging by the hour. But a lot of guys, they just find it easier to just go about it this way. Just tell the customer, say, hey, instead of me coming out looking at it, this is what I charge. I'll come out there, I'll be as efficient as fast as possible, and that's what they do. And it can work out that way. But even if they're comfortable with your hourly rate, usually they're still going to ask you, how long do you think it's going to take? Because they, in their head, they want to still try to figure out what it's going to cost them overall, which is smart on their part. You need to be careful when you answer this. I worked with guys in the past that they wouldn't even answer this. This would just make them mad, and they would just steer clear, and they just would say, I'll tell you when I'm done. It is kind of hard to figure it out sometimes. Usually you try to give yourself a little bit of cushion, a little bit longer than you think it's going to take, because usually things pop up. If you tell them 4 to 5 hours, they'll remember that. If it happens to take you 6, then you got to charge them. They're to say, but you thought it was going to take 4 to 5 hours. Why did it take you 6? And they're going to be already ready, in a sense, to pay that 4 to 5 hours. They might even already have the check written out. They might try to shortchange you. So that's another con to kind of go along with this. If they ask you how long it's going to take, and you're a little shy with your estimate, it's better safe to say a little bit longer than necessary. And in that case, if you do go a little bit over, it's not a big deal. Also, if you get it done faster, that looks better for you. You can also say it didn't take as long as I thought. That worked out for you, and they would be happy. So definitely be careful answering how long you think it's going to take. Now let's look at bidding or estimating the job. After you go out to the property, look it over, figure out how steep it is, what the terrain's like, you could then get a better gauge for how long it's going to take you. You also want to try to measure the area, whether you're walking it off or having a measuring wheel, to calculate how big the area is. If it is too thick to get into, then I'll share a link here for this video. You can go online and measure without even stepping foot on the property to measure. It's very accurate. It saves you a lot of scrapes going through the saplings and the briars. But you need to know the size of your area. Once you know the size of the area and you figure out what the terrain's like, how thick it is, you also need to consider your target rate. You need to know how long it takes you to mow an acre in this situation. It's usually pretty common to break it down into classes. A job like this, for example, when it's a little bit steeper, it's not real thick, but it's a little steeper, would probably be like a class 1. Meaning you can do it fairly easily. Yes, you have to go up and down the slope as opposed to sideways, so it's going to take a little bit more time, but you can do it at class 1. It's not going to be really that hard on the machine. At class 2, for example, is going to be something that's really thick. A lot of saplings, something that you have to raise your mower up and go down on the trees to get them to grind properly. Go back and forth to get a nice finished cut. Maybe it's something a little bit steeper. It just, in general, something that's going to take a lot longer. You're going to be getting your machine scratched up more. It's going to be a lot more involved. So if you kind of break it into different classes, that'll give you a feel too how to go about charging. So once you have your target rate established for your class that you're doing, you can then know how long it's going to take you to mow it per acre. And it'll take a job or two to get a feel for how long or how fast you can do these different class jobs and get an hour knocked out. But the more you take your time to measure it and actually time yourself on an acre with the different classes of terrain, the better off you're going to be in the future the more jobs you do. Once you have your size figured out and your target rate, you also need to then factor in your time for coming out, looking at the job, your time for mobilization, getting your machine there, and also getting it back. Factor this from your shop. Then, once you have all these calculatings done, you're adding your travel time, your estimating time, and the time you think it's going to take you to do the job. You then want to give yourself a slight cushion. Usually round up a little bit to the nearest 50 or so. Why you do this is because you're taking risks by giving a flat number for this job. It's going to be hard to say how long it's going to take exactly, but you're assuming a lot of risk, but it makes the customer feel better because they have a solid figure they can go by. You want to give yourself a little cushion, that way it's a little safer for you. When it's all said and done, if everything goes really smooth and you realize that you're way over with your number, you can work that out with the customer. They would definitely, I'm sure, appreciate getting a little bit knocked off their bill, or some of them still might just be fine. They agree to that amount, you went above and beyond what you did, and they might just be happy paying you that either higher rate or that high number, and that's fine. But it's just good morals if you do feel like you're charging them way too much to talk to them about it and be willing to knock off a little bit off your bill, just to be fair. But the first time you do a job like this, especially the first time you're on a property, it's always going to take a little bit longer. So you need to keep that in mind. If you go back and do the same job next year, it's not going to be as thick. You can then charge a little bit less, perhaps, if you want to. The third way about charging for specialty mowing is by the acre. Same thing, you need to look at the job. You need to figure out what class the terrain is, how thick the area is. You need to be able to calculate accurately how big and how many acres the area is. You then want to be able to break this down. If it's an odd number, say 6.33 acres, you want to be able to break that down into your hourly rate per acre to charge the customer accordingly. Now keep in mind when you're doing this, not every acre is the same. Some thicknesses are going to vary, so charging a specialty mowing job by the acre is a little bit more difficult to do because you might get into a patch and it's a lot thicker than you realized. It's in the heart of the property, you couldn't really see it. It's going to take you longer. So just gotta be careful if you're charging by the acre for specialty mowing. If you're just brush hogging a field, it's wide open and it's been done a couple times, it's a little bit easier to do by the acre. But for specialty mowing, especially if it's really thick, you need to watch charging this by this way, but you can do it. I've found that bidding a job usually works out best for me, but sometimes if you're in a hurry, then or don't really have time to go out there and look at it, bidding by the hour can work just as well once you have your numbers keyed in. Bidding by the acre works too. You just need to be prepared for some different thicknesses and some different terrain that you can't always see. But no matter how you choose to bid this job, some other things to consider is the time of year that they want this job done. In the fall, like this in this video, everything is nice and dead. It's not going to be as thick. The brush is going to be easier to see through. Some downsides to this are things like the goldenrod are going to be all dead and they're just going to blow everywhere, kind of create some visual issues. But most of the time in the fall, it's a really great time when things are more dead. On the downside, in the fall, it's usually a little bit wetter. You got to keep that in mind for your machine. You don't want to be making ruts. You don't want to be getting stuck. Late in the spring, it's going to take a little bit longer to do a job because everything is growing in full force. It's just a lot thicker. It's going to take more fuel. It's going to take more time. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about when they want this job done. Sometimes it's out of your control. They just want it done a certain time of year. You just need to be able to factor that in accordingly. But the weather definitely plays a big part in this, in what season it is as well. For specialty mowing, there usually is a reason they call you and don't decide to do it themselves, no matter how simple they make the job sound over the phone. You need to keep that all that in mind when you're charging. You are set up to be able to do these jobs, and it's going to cost a little bit higher rate than somebody with a smaller tractor or just a neighbor. So you just need to be prepared to explain that to them if they just think it's way out of their range or it's not fair what you're charging. Keep in mind the first time is going to take longer. It's just a matter of getting used to the lay of the land to get a feel for how things go. But once you get a few jobs under your belt, it'll go a lot smoother. You get a better feel for your target rate and which method you prefer to charge. But as in the beginning of the video I promised, a little tip for once you get on a job like this. So if it's a smaller job on a bigger property, chances are that they're going to have some other areas that they are going to need done. Whether it's a wood line that needs thinned out a little bit, some trails cut in, some undergrowth taken out in a food plot area. On a bigger property, there's usually more chances for extra work. So when you're out there, make sure you're asking them, is there anything else that you've done while I'm out here? Anything else I can help with? And chances are that there is maybe something that they have that they didn't really think of. If you would, leave a comment below which charging method you like best.